The sound of the door didn't just echo through the house. It echoed through something inside her that had already been cracking for years. It wasn't the first time a door had been slammed in anger, but this one carried weight, finality, the kind of sound that doesn't ask to be forgiven later. The hinges screamed, the frame rattled, and the silence that followed felt loud enough to bruise. She stood exactly where she was when the words landed. Useless, not shouted, not even said with drama, just tossed out casually like a fact that had finally gotten boring to repeat. Then the door, then gone. She didn't cry. That surprised her. For someone who had been trained over time to apologize for breathing too loudly, she expected tears. Hot, humiliating tears that came with begging texts and frantic self-blame. But none came. Her chest didn't tighten, her throat didn't burn, nothing. On a free range. Only a strange calm, spreading slowly like ice through water. The kitchen clock kept ticking. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere outside, a car passed. The world hadn't paused for her humiliation, and that realization didn't hurt nearly as much as it should have. She rested her hands on the counter, noticing details she'd never paid attention to before. A hairline crack in the marble, a faint coffee stain she hadn't scrubbed hard enough that morning, the reflection of her own face in the microwave door. Her eyes looked clearer than she expected, focused, almost awake. For years, she had learned how to disappear in this house without leaving it, how to fold herself into smaller versions that were easier to tolerate, how to anticipate moods the way some people anticipate weather, adjusting tone, posture, words, silence. She'd been praised for being understanding, for being low maintenance, for not making things harder than they had to be, and slowly, carelessly, those compliments had curved into accusations. Can't, too quiet, too soft, too dependent, useless. She replayed the moment again, not because it hurt, but because it felt important to memorize it accurately. The tone, the timing, the way the word had landed like a door key thrown onto a table, signaling departure before the body followed. She had said nothing. That part unsettled her most. Normally, silence came after pleading, after explanations, after explaining intentions she hadn't even had. But this time, there was nothing chasing the insult. No instinct to defend herself like a habit she couldn't break. It was as if something inside her had simply stepped back. She moved through the house slowly, not out of fear but out of curiosity. The bedroom still smelled like perfume and tension. The bathroom mirror reflected a woman who looked lighter, unburdened by the weight of reaction. She sat on the edge of the bed and thought, not about the argument, not about love, not even about leaving, but about pattern. That word floated up from somewhere deep and deliberate. Pattern. The relationship hadn't collapsed. It had been eroding. A long sequence of moments that had trained her partner to believe something dangerous, that she would always stay, absorb, always soften the blows. She remembered the first time she'd been made to feel small and had laughed it off. Remembered apologizing for a mistake that hadn't been hers just to restore peace. Remembered hearing, "I don't know what I'd do without you," on days when obedience was rewarded. And what do you actually contribute? On days when it wasn't. Love hadn't left the house that night. Respect had. She went back to the kitchen and poured herself a glass of water. Her hands didn't shake. Detail struck her with quiet significance. People told stories about heartbreak as chaos, smashing plates, sobbing into pillows, dramatic declarations whispered into phones, but this felt organized. She drank slowly, letting the quiet settle, not the tense quiet of waiting, but the neutral quiet of absence. The house had never been hers, not really. She had lived in it like a guest who cleaned too much and asked too few questions. But now, with the door shut behind the woman who had spoken her worth aloud and walked away, felt oddly neutral. Like a stage cleared between acts, her phone buzzed once on the counter. She didn't check it. That alone felt like rebellion. Instead, she walked to the window and looked out at the street. Neighbors carried on. Porch lights flickered on. Somewhere, someone laughed. The world wasn't aligned against her. It just hadn't been paying attention. And that realization was freeing in a way she'd never been taught to feel. She thought about the word useless. Useless at what? At being controlled? At absorbing cruelty quietly? At pretending confusion when the manipulation was obvious? Fravers but Tevenor, Hafarai. If that's what useless meant, maybe it was time to become very good at it. Night settled gently, not dramatically. She didn't pace, she didn't rehearse confrontations, and she washed the dishes, folded a blanket, turned off lights one by one, as if practicing a smaller version of departure without moving an inch. When she lay down to sleep, she slept deeply, without apology, without dreaming of reconciliation. At morning came with light slipping through the blinds, painting lines across the kitchen floor. She woke before her alarm, rested, alert. The house felt different in daylight, less like a shared hostage situation. More like a set waiting for rearrangement. She tied her hair back and opened the refrigerator. Eggs, bread, butter, fruit she'd bought and barely touched because meals had always been rushed negotiations. She cooked slowly, not in anger. Not in sadness. With care, bacon crisped evenly, coffee brewed rich. She sliced fruit with deliberate precision, arranging it neatly on a plate, then paused. She took another plate from the cabinet, identical, clean. Placed beside the first, she set the table for two. Not as an act of hope, as an act of intention. When footsteps eventually returned hours later, hesitant, cautious, already rehearsing whatever justification would restore balance, she didn't rush. She didn't flinch. The second plate sat untouched, waiting. Ninta. And for the first time since the door had slammed, Sheila allowed herself a small private thought. This house is going to teach you something you never let me be. The next move had already begun forming, not out of rage, but out of clarity. And clarity was far more dangerous. The pan was already warm when the front door clicked open. That detail mattered. She had cracked the eggs before the sound reached her ears, before the familiar weight of presence returned to the house. Timing, she would later realize, mattered more than emotion ever had. The bacon sizzled softly, controlled, not frantic. Coffee steamed in its glass pot, rich and dark. The kitchen smelled like normalcy, carefully constructed, intentionally convincing. She did not turn around. I can't. Instead, she plated the eggs with steady hands, sprinkling pepper evenly, as if she were preparing a meal for a guest she respected. The toast came next, golden but not burnt, butter melting slowly across its surface. She set everything down with care, aligning the cutlery, straightening the napkin, 2 plates, identical. The second plate had not been touched since the night before. No crumbs, no fingerprints, just presence. Behind her, she felt the hesitation, the pause in footsteps that always came when something didn't match expectation. For years, she had been fluent in that pause, had learned to rush in and fill it with reassurance, apologies, explanations before suspicion could take root. This time, she let it breathe. The chair scraped gently as her partner shifted weight, unsure whether to sit, speak, or retreat entirely. The house held both of them in a fragile standoff, the kind that has nothing to do with anger and everything to do with recalibration. She poured coffee into 2 mugs. The sound was unmissable. Steam rose between them like a thin veil, and for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself the smallest smile. Not warmth, not affection, but something quieter. Something that belonged solely to her. Her partner finally noticed the second place setting. Not at first, not immediately. It took a moment, the way it always did when something disrupted entitlement, when something balked disauk. Jawed, eyes scanned the table instinctively, already assuming the seat would be hers. Then she froze. A flicker crossed her face. Confusion first, then irritation disguised as humor, then something thinner, something sharp. She felt it without looking. Still, she did not explain. She lifted her mug and took a slow sip as if nothing extraordinary was happening. As if cooking breakfast for 2 on the morning after being told she was useless were the most natural thing in the world. Silence stretched. Normally, this was where she would intervene. Soft words, nervous laughter. I wasn't sure when you were coming back. I thought maybe we could talk. I didn't want things to feel awkward. But silence, she had learned, was only uncomfortable for the one who depended on control. Her partner cleared her throat. Nothing followed. The second plate sat between them like a question with teeth. She finally turned, meeting her partner's eyes fully for the first time since the door had slammed the night before. Her gaze was calm, observant. There was no accusation there, no need. She simply looked, as if seeing someone she hadn't quite figured out yet. It unnerved her more than shouting ever could have, but Greg fast proceeded in fragments. Her partner sat down slowly, testing the chair as if afraid it might disappear. She took a bite of toast and spoke about mundane things. The traffic, a coworker's complaint, the weather, filling the air with practiced normalcy. She performed remorse poorly, wrapping it in casual tone, as though insults evaporated overnight simply by absence. She was used to absolution without accountability, but the woman across from her only nodded occasionally, listening without giving. Her attention drifted naturally, comfortably, like someone no longer invested in the performance. At some point, her partner glanced again at the empty plate, this time longer. "Is someone else coming?" She asked lightly, the way one asks a question they don't want answered honestly. The woman smiled again. A small smile, polite, inconclusive. She didn't respond. The effect was immediate. The air shifted, thickened. Her partner's fork paused midair, before clattering softly back onto the plate. The question had not been ignored. It had been absorbed and rendered unnecessary. Control, she realized as she drank her coffee, was rarely seized loudly. More often, it was surrendered quietly by someone who suddenly realized they no longer had it. Her partner scanned her face for clues, for tells, for the habits she had relied on for years. Lips that used to part eagerly, brows that used to pinch with concern, eyes that used to ask permission to exist. None appeared. Instead, there was composure, the kind that suggests private plans. She tried another approach: laughter, too loud, compliments, poorly timed, even a self-deprecating jab meant to rebuild familiarity. Nothing landed. Everything slid off. Finally, frustration surfaced. "What's going on with you?" she asked, irritation sharpening her voice. "You're being weird." The woman considered that weird had always been code for uncooperative. "Yeah." She set her mug down carefully, met her partner's gaze again, and answered calmly. "I slept well, that was all." It was the wrong answer, the worst possible one. Her partner stared, unsure whether to be insulted or unsettled. Repair had been expected, guilt, maybe gratitude for her return. Instead, she found emotional neutrality, a blank space where dependency should have been. She suddenly noticed smaller things. The woman hadn't asked where she'd gone, hadn't apologized, hadn't mentioned the argument at all. The insult had not been acknowledged because it no longer held power. That frightened her. The breakfast ended awkwardly. Dishes were cleared without conflict, chairs pushed in neatly. The second plate remained untouched. Her partner hovered, lingering in doorways, trying to reclaim importance through proximity. Questions were asked again, roundabout ones, probing ones, received only partial attention. When the woman finally left the kitchen, she did so without explanation, moving into the bedroom to begin organizing things that hadn't been disturbed in years. Files, receipts, old notebooks, not in a panic, with intent. From the hallway, her partner watched helplessly, sensing, without understanding, that something had shifted beneath her feet. The ground was no longer soft, it was precise. Measured, that afternoon, she left the house again. This time the door did not slam, and this time the woman noticed something else, something far more valuable than noise. Her partner checked her phone twice before stepping outside. When the door closed quietly behind her, the woman returned to the kitchen and stood before the table once more. She picked up the untouched plate, considered it, then placed it carefully back in the cabinet, not thrown away, not cleaned again, preserved. She sat alone, sipping the last of the coffee, already thinking several steps ahead, about routines, about leverage, about how easily people revealed themselves when they believed they were still safe. The first seed had been planted, and it would grow best in silence. Forgiveness arrived first. At least that's how it looked. In the days that followed, she became everything that once softened conflict. Her voice lowered again. Her responses turned thoughtful, accommodating. She listened more than she spoke. Sheila Noak. She laughed at stories she'd heard before. She remembered preferences. She anticipated needs before they were voiced. It was seamless, convincing. Her partner noticed instantly and relaxed. Now, the human mind is comforted by familiar shapes, especially ones that restore superiority. The return of compliance felt like relief, like resolution. The house settled into a rhythm that resembled peace, and that resemblance was enough. But what her partner mistook for reconciliation was a rearrangement. It began with routines. She woke earlier, quietly adjusting her schedule to create long stretches of uninterrupted time alone. She altered household habits subtly, switching grocery stores, changing delivery times, rerouting weekly errands. Small changes, barely perceptible, yet cumulatively efficient. She was composing silence like architecture. Phone calls were shortened. Messages to friends returned gently delayed. Social plans rescheduled with apologetic warmth. There was no confrontation, no drama, just gradual absence disguised as busyness. People don't notice when you leave slowly. She paid closer attention to finances than she ever had before. Accounts she once avoided to keep the peace became transparent landscapes. Passwords were noted. Patterns emerged. Transactions told stories words never had. She didn't accuse. She documented. Her partner mistook calm for forgiveness, mistook attentiveness for dependence, returning to its proper place. Compliments resumed. Subtle, conditional. Praise tied to compliance, the language of control, slipped back into its old wardrobe. You're different lately. You seem better. Better meant quieter. Better meant useful. She accepted the labels with grace. She smiled when gestures were returned, when arms wrapped around her without tenderness. She didn't pull away. She let proximity exist with. It was an exercise in restraint, and she was learning quickly how powerful restraint could be. Each night, when the house settled and her partner slept, she sat alone at the desk by the window. A notebook lay hidden beneath a stack of old magazines, unremarkable, forgettable. Inside it, pages filled not with emotion, but with observations, dales, behaviors, inconsistencies. She didn't label it revenge. That word was too emotional, too impulsive. She labeled it clarity. Patterns unfolded like maps when observed without fear. Sudden mood shifts tied to specific topics, deflection of accountability through humor, financial secrecy masked as generosity. Rewritten histories repeated often enough to sound true. She copied phrases verbatim, circled names, cross-referenced moments weeks apart that contradicted each other cleanly. She tracked who was contacted immediately after arguments, who knew pieces of stories she was never meant to hear. She learned what made her partner anxious, what made her careless. She learned when lies needed reinforcement, and when truth accidentally slipped through. Her behavior stayed gentle throughout. She agreed easily, conceded when it cost her nothing, deferred in public, supported loudly. Privately, she disappeared inch by inch from the emotional ecosystem that once sustained the imbalance. Dependent is a system. Remove one support at a time, and it collapses under its own weight. Her partner grew more comfortable, too comfortable. She overshared now, spoke carelessly, confessed small things, believing transparency had returned safety. The woman listened with a sympathetic tilt of the head, storing information calmly, consciously. Every detail had future value. Weeks passed, no arguments, no slammed doors. The peace felt earned. It made her partner careless. One evening, a message appeared on the shared tablet by accident, a fragment of conversation that wasn't meant to surface. Her partner apologized lightly when she noticed joking about privacy, about paranoia. She accepted the explanation immediately, too immediately. That night, while the house slept, she wrote faster than usual. She began categorizing entries, control tactics, inconsistencies, external leverage, and then something else, past events she'd once questioned but dismissed, stories that never quite aligned, sudden relocations, a former friend she'd never been allowed to meet, a job change explained too casually. The pieces had always been there, she simply hadn't been allowed to assemble them. Forgiveness had bought access. Calm had bought time. Compliance had restored proximity without submission. Her partner no longer guarded herself. And that was the most dangerous gift of all. On a quiet afternoon, while folding laundry, her partner mentioned a name casually, too casually. A name attached to a story she'd told differently years before. The woman nodded, folded a shirt, asked nothing. But her pulse quickened, not with excitement, but confirmation. That night, the notebook gained a new section. Nat Cost Abbas. She titled it Points of Failure. She didn't feel anger as she wrote, only focus, the satisfaction of structure emerging from chaos, of truth finally organizing itself. By the time her partner noticed any difference again, it was too late to adjust. The woman was no longer reacting. She was orchestrating. She closed the notebook carefully, slid it back into its hiding place, and lay beside the woman who still believed forgiveness had restored control. Outside, the city moved without awareness. Inside, something irreversible had already been set in motion. And soon silence wouldn't be enough to contain what was coming. Paranoia doesn't announce itself loudly. It arrives whispering, wearing logic as camouflage. At first, her partner blamed stress, work pressure, poor sleep. She laughed off the small things, keys not where they were left, a familiar object gone missing only to reappear days later in plain sight. The kind of forgetfulness no one admits to immediately. The kind that waits for proof before turning inward. The woman noticed everything. She noticed how often her partner paused mid-sentence now, searching her own memory before continuing. How she hesitated before accusing, unsure whether the fault belonged in the room or inside her head. Doubt had crept in, quietly unpacking its bags, and the woman helped it settle. She did nothing obvious. No dramatic lies, no outright denial. She simply adjusted the frame around memories already weakened by time. Okay, didn't you say you loaned that out? She'd ask gently when an object was rediscovered. I remember you being okay with that, she'd add softly about plans that had never been discussed, always spoken kindly, always reasonable. Memory is fragile when challenged calmly. Her partner began keeping notes on her phone, lists meant to anchor reality. But even lists failed when confronted with certainty, delivered without emotion. When correction came wrapped in affection, self-doubt felt safer than confrontation. Then the messages began, nothing threatening, just odd. K. A notification preview on her partner's phone one evening from a number that wasn't saved. A single line, I thought you'd want to know I'm back. When questioned, the woman merely shrugged. You didn't mention it. Her partner didn't ask further. She stared at the screen too long, then locked the phone, as if that might lock the past away as well. The woman watched her carefully after that. Sleep grew lighter, jokes grew forced, questions grew sharper but less confident. When the woman hummed while cleaning or lingered at mirrors as if admiring herself, her partner's eyes followed nervously, searching for intention where none could be challenged openly. Then came the encounter. They were buying groceries when her partner froze, halfway down an aisle. The woman followed her gaze calmly, already knowing who she would see. A woman stood near the dairy section, older now, thinner, eyes harder, but unmistakable. Someone from before, someone whose name had been erased from conversations, whose existence had always been explained vaguely, inconsistently. The woman didn't react, her partner did. The color drained from her face so suddenly it looked rehearsed. She dropped the basket, murmured something about needing air, and walked away too quickly. Okay. The woman stayed behind, finishing the shopping. Later, at home, her partner paced. Spoke too much, recalled stories wrong, claimed coincidences, overcompensated with affection that smelled like fear. The woman listened, patient as ever. That night, she returned to the notebook and added new names. She began cross-referencing timelines more aggressively now. Old emails, archived social media posts, employment gaps, charities her partner had once sponsored quietly, then stopped funding altogether. Respectability had been carefully curated, but not perfectly. A pattern emerged that no amount of charm could erase. Years ago, there had been an incident, brushed aside as misunderstanding, a scandal smothered before it grew teeth. A woman who had accused, then disappeared socially. Her partner had changed cities shortly thereafter, changed circles, changed narratives. The woman followed every thread without urgency. Truth, she had learned, surfaced faster when rushed by no one. She let her partner talk herself into mistakes, repeated old lies with new details, named dates that contradicted records, claimed forgetfulness about events that had once been defended fiercely. She corrected none of it. Instead, she began retelling memories with confidence. That happened after you moved back, didn't it? I thought you said she apologized. You told me the investigation was dropped. Each statement she made was just slightly off, never fully wrong, but tilted just enough to tilt reality with it. Her partner began snapping in frustration. You're remembering it wrong, she blurted out one evening, sharper than intended. The edge in her voice cracked immediately afterward. The woman blinked, calm and wounded at once. I'm sorry, she murmured. That's simply how I remember you telling it. Her partner apologized quickly, too quickly. Without either of them acknowledging it, the balance between them shifted. The woman's steady patience drained the defensiveness out of old stories until only guilt remained. Soon, her partner began confessing small fragments on her own, tiny admissions offered preemptively, attempts to stay ahead of anything that might surface. She called the past messier than she had previously claimed. The woman only nodded, listening. Kna? She wasn't thinking in terms of winning anymore. She was thinking in terms of reveal. Okay. One evening, her partner asked a question she never should have voiced. Do you think people can just be forgotten? She said too casually. If enough time passes, the woman considered her for a long, still moment. No, she replied softly. I think they wait. The words settled in the room like a drop of ink in water, slow, irrevocable. Eh. After that night, her partner began sleeping poorly, checking the locks twice, flinching at small sounds. Scrolling through old contacts as though something long unseen might return, it wasn't a ghost haunting her. Yeah, it was memory reminding her. The woman became meticulous. She forwarded herself harmless emails, quietly backed up files, screenshotted contradictions, and archived them under dates her partner would never think to examine. The revenge was no longer growing. It had matured, financial trails mapped cleanly, statements cross-checked against evidence, and then the final page. A statement written in another woman's handwriting, a statement that had never been submitted officially. Yeah, a statement that described a night rewritten too many times, a statement her partner had sworn never existed. The room felt smaller as she read. "Who else has this?" her partner asked hoarsely. The woman leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms. "There are 3 of us now," she said quietly. Understanding hit like collapse, not exposure yet, not arrest. Something worse, inevitability. Pah! The woman stood and walked to the kitchen, returning with a 3rd mug. She placed it carefully beside the plates already cleared. Steam rose slowly into the air. Verktomat Kruffel. Steam rose slowly into the air. Kah! "This," she said calmly, "is the part where you realize escape was only ever an illusion." Her partner began crying then, not loudly, not theatrically. The sound was small, broken. She pleaded, first for secrecy, then for control of narrative, then finally for mercy. The woman listened to it all. She felt nothing but resolve. She hadn't been useless, she had been unseen, and unseen. And unseen people notice everything. By the time her partner realized the depth of the cage closing around her, every door was already mapped, every lie annotated, every excuse catalogued. The 3rd witness didn't demand justice. She demanded truth to fatter. And truth, once acknowledged, doesn't negotiate. The woman cleared the table carefully that night, stacking dishes neatly, leaving the 3rd plate out longer than usual. Tomorrow, she thought, would be about consequences. Tonight was simply about understanding that there was no way back. Collapse doesn't always look like screaming. Sometimes it looks like compliance, too much of it. Her partner tried to regain control the only way she knew how, by returning to old tactics. The tone softened, then sharpened. Praise reappeared, conditional and strategic. Guilt was deployed carefully. Tears were timed. Laughter was weaponized. She tried familiarity first, then authority, then desperation. None of it worked. Because the woman had learned the technique better than the teacher, she mirrored her partner perfectly now. Not mockingly, not obviously, just accurately. Every dismissive phrase that had once been used to shrink her was returned gently, polished, delivered with clinical calm. "Yeah, you're overthinking," she said once, the exact way it had been said to her for years. "You always make things heavier than they are. Let's not turn this into something dramatic." Her partner recoiled each time, not from the words themselves, but from recognition. It felt different when spoken without apology. The woman became impossibly reasonable. She asked questions that didn't accuse but forced answers into daylight. She repeated statements slowly when her partner contradicted herself, letting silence underline inconsistency. She never raised her voice, never rushed. Urgency had been stripped away from her entirely, and urgency was where her partner used to hide. Gaslighting requires a confident liar and a doubting audience. Now there was no doubt left to feed it. Hecht. Her partner began stumbling mid-sentence, stopping herself, revising facts instinctively. The woman would tilt her head thoughtfully, as if trying to understand, not to forgive. "I just want us to be clear," she would say. Clarity is healthy. Each conversation ended the same way, with her partner more disoriented than before, unsure which version of herself had just spoken. Sleep vanished completely, appetite followed. Control habits intensified, cleaning obsessively, organizing files that no longer mattered, rehearsing apologies that couldn't land. Meanwhile, the woman grew lighter. She dressed differently now, clean lines, no excess softness. She took longer walks alone, returned calmer. Her energy no longer bent toward anticipation. It radiated from certainty. Law enforcement entered the frame quietly, not knocking, watching. The woman had planned it that way. It began with a consultation that wasn't framed as an accusation, then clarifying emails, worded neutrally. Then a reviewed statement submitted for record purposes only. No demands, no timeline pressure. Just documentation aligned too cleanly to ignore. Her partner noticed small disruptions first, a scheduled meeting postponed without explanation. A contact suddenly unavailable, someone who didn't return a call, the system didn't move loudly, it aligned. One evening, her partner finally asked what she was afraid to ask before. Are you trying to destroy me? Yeah, the woman considered house. The woman considered her carefully before responding. No, she said. I'm letting you be seen. The confrontation that followed had been years in the making. Her partner broke first, raised her voice. Accused, deflected. Then, exhausted, tried to minimize again, desperately reframing her actions as survivorship, not cruelty. It no longer needed anger. It needed patience. One afternoon, while her partner showered, the woman's phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. She didn't react. She didn't reply. She simply archived it and wrote a final note beneath her previous ones, underlining it twice. She is already afraid. The ghost her partner thought she had buried long ago hadn't returned to punish. It had returned to witness. And very soon, it would not be alone. The house changed once the third presence arrived, not physically, not yet. No extra shoes by the door, no unfamiliar voices drifting through the hallway, no shadows slipping across thresholds. But the air felt heavier, as if something unseen had taken a seat at the table and refused to leave. Her partner sensed it immediately. She couldn't name it, but she felt it. Felt it in the pauses that grew longer, in conversations that lost their direction, in the silence that no longer felt empty but occupied. The second plate returned, not regularly, not predictably. Some mornings it appeared beside their breakfast. Some evenings it waited already set, clean and untouched. Sometimes it vanished for days, only to reappear as though it had never left. Her partner asked about it once. The woman looked up from pouring coffee, blinking as if noticing it for the first time, then smiled faintly. Does it bother you? She asked. The question landed strangely, too calm, too curious. Her partner forced a laugh, pretended it didn't matter. But afterward, she began watching the table more often, as though the plate might reveal something if she looked away. The woman never explained the third presence. She let implication do the work. The first clue surfaced accidentally. They were driving when her partner's phone connected to the car automatically, playing a recording. Voices, faint but unmistakable. Younger partner tapped his spot Ed. Her partner's na sadder. Her partner's voice, younger. Younger. Strained. Another voice. Distorted, unclear. Her partner lunged for the console too late. The woman quietly turned the volume down and pulled over. What is that? Her partner demanded, already breaking. The woman tilted her head, listening to the hum of the engine. A memory, she said gently. I keap tushen blame the poor pastidefdi tat keshemes props teverismafarai. One I didn't know existed. The clip ended abruptly. She didn't ask questions. She didn't blame. She simply drove. That night, her partner unraveled. Denial, minimization, frantic reframing, every explanation contradicted the last. The woman didn't need to write anything down now. She remembered everything. The second clue appeared days later, a paper left by accident, notations, dales, inconsistencies. Her partner's voice shook. Oh, did you go through my things? You told me I could, the woman answered softly. Untrue, but close enough to tilt certainty. Fear replaced anger. Yet her partner asked who else knew, how much the woman had seen, why she was doing this. The woman never answered directly. She spoke instead about timelines, shifting stories, and how inconvenient truths were always the first to be rewritten. Her partner understood. This wasn't about reconciliation. This was about record. The third presence emerged piece by piece. A name dropped casually during dinner, a city referenced offhand. A detail too precise to be guesswork. Her partner froze. Why are you doing this? She whispered. The woman thought about it, then replied, because you called me useless, and you were wrong. Later, as rain murmured against the windows, the woman set a notebook on the table, not with force, just certainty. Her partner's hands hovered above it, trembling. She opened it slowly. Inside were dates, observations, careful notes, a quiet archive of everything she thought she'd hidden. And there, waiting on the last page. It was a single sentence written in steady, deliberate handwriting. The third presence is almost here. The woman didn't interrupt. She waited until the story collapsed under its own contradictions. Then she spoke. You taught me how, she said calmly, how to make someone question themselves, how to sound sincere while erasing accountability. How to wait until the other person apologizes for your behavior. Her words were gentle, accurate. Her partner shook her head, whispering that it wasn't the same. That intention mattered. The woman nodded. That's what you used to say too. The room felt stripped bare, no performances left, no leverage unspent. All that remained was truth, boring and devastating. The authorities didn't arrive that night. They didn't need to. Her partner already knew the outcome. She saw it in the woman's posture, in the way preparation had been replaced by completion. Nothing more needed managing, nothing left to scramble. This wasn't rage, it was execution without violence. I was never useless, the woman said quietly. I was quiet, and you forgot what quiet people collect. I was never useless, the woman said quietly. I was quiet, and you forgot what quiet people collect. Her partner slid down into the chair, diminished, frightened, not of punishment, but of irrelevance. The woman turned toward the window, watching the city lights cycle on, life moving forward without permission. She felt no triumph, only relief. The final step didn't require confrontation, it required absence. Tomorrow would bring consequences formalized, statements corroborated, timelines locked, systems activated long before anyone knocked on the door. Tonight was simply about letting the truth settle, and once truth settles, it never leaves. She picked up the third mug and rinsed it, setting it beside the others. For the first time, the place at the table felt empty, not waiting, finished. The knock came exactly when she expected it, not dramatic, not rushed. 3 measured taps against the door, separated by instinctive professionalism. The sound traveled cleanly through the house, touching walls that had heard too many lies without ever holding them accountable. Her partner froze. The woman did not. She stood calmly from the table, smoothing her shirt as if preparing to leave for work. There was no fear left in her movements, no hesitation, just completion. By the time the door opened, the outcome had already settled into place. The conversation was brief, polite, procedural. Names were confirmed, statements. The tone was neutral. No accusations yet, no conclusions announced, just inevitability finally stepping into visibility. Her partner tried to speak and failed. The woman watched quietly from the hallway, not interfering, not explaining. She had done her part already, every document submitted, every corroboration aligned, every contradiction preserved. She didn't need to witness the end. She went into the bedroom and packed a small bag. Not because she had to leave immediately, but because she wanted to choose the moment herself. From the bedroom doorway, she listened to fragments of conversation dissolve into gravity, words like follow-up, clarification, procedure, the sound of paper shifting, a request for privacy that wasn't fully granted. Her partner sat when she was told to sit. That was new. When the door finally closed again, the house did not exhale. It held its breath. Her partner stood alone in the living room, staring at nothing. The role she had curated so carefully, charming, respected, believable, had cracked, not publicly yet, but internally, beyond repair. The woman stepped out, bag in hand. Her partner turned slowly, eyes red, face unrecognizable in the absence of confidence. She opened her mouth to speak, to bargain, to apologize, to reclaim something. The woman stopped her with a raised hand. No, she said softly. This isn't a conversation. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't dramatic. It was honest. I loved who you pretended to be, she continued, voice steady. And I forgive myself for believing you. That was all she offered. She walked to the kitchen. The table was still set, 2 plates stacked in the sink. 1 plate still on the table, clean, cold, abandoned exactly where it had been placed. She looked at it for a long moment, then she left it there. The door closed behind her, without sound. Outside, life continued as it always does, for those who step forward instead of looking back. The sky was clear. Traffic moved. Somewhere, coffee was being poured into mugs by people who expected nothing worse than routine. She didn't feel hollow, she felt intact. What she carried with her didn't feel like victory. It felt like self-possession, the quiet return of something hadn't realized she'd lost until it was no longer missing. Behind her, the house absorbed silence, not the silence of peace, the silence of consequence. Days passed, then weeks. Her partner tried to call at first, voicemails that shifted in tone from rage to remorse to pleading confusion. Messages that referenced shared memories like currency. Promises that arrived too late to be considered believable, they went unanswered. Eventually, the messages stopped. The investigation didn't explode into headlines. It didn't need to. Respectability doesn't die loudly. It erodes under scrutiny until nothing holds. Doors closed. Invitations vanished. Credibility thinned. Account: people don't abandon you when guilt surfaces, they step away when certainty disappears. The woman learned of none of it directly. She didn't have to. Accept. She had already moved into a smaller place that felt larger, simply because her presence didn't need to collapse inward to survive. The air felt honest. The space responded to her in ways the old house never had. As she began cooking for herself, real meals, no audience, no performance. One morning, she set the table automatically for one and paused. A single plate. Enough. She smiled then, not with satisfaction, not with relief, with recognition. Some nights, she thought about the sound of the door slamming months ago, how violent it had felt, how final, how she'd believed for a moment that silence meant defeat. She knew better now. Silence had been her apprenticeship. Just sacked at deck to tack turned at noise. And leaving without noise had been her mastery. If anyone had asked her what revenge looked like, she wouldn't have spoken about exposure or control or collapse. She would have spoken about absence, about the power of no longer being available to harm, about reclaiming shape where someone once taught you had none, about the danger of mistaking someone's quiet for weakness. In the old house, the plate remained clean, untouched, ignored. It waited for no one, and that, more than anything, was the punishment.